As this course draws to a close, we are approaching the frontier of knowledge in how to properly manage and control battery packs. The electronics aspects are important, they're necessary, but they're pretty routine. State of charge at this point has been well defined, and we have seen some established methods that can be used to get very good state of charge estimates. We've also seen good methods to estimate cell resistance and total capacity, and based on those we have very good state of health estimates. We've seen that cell energy calculations are straightforward, and we've looked at a couple of different types of cell balancing with different complexity and speed that we can implement. We could make improvements to any of these, and I imagine that over the years there will be improvements made to all of these. But for many applications, the current state of the art is fine. It provides very adequate battery management. There are some questions still, I think, relating to what happens when battery cells age, and will battery management algorithms that are designed using beginning of life models of cells really work properly for cells that are approaching their end of life. So there's some improvements I think we can make there. There are improvements we can make in modeling, because if we make better models of cells, they can be directly incorporated in some of the methods we've looked at, especially state estimation. And another issue regards power calculation, and that is what we are going to be looking at in this chapter here. But Davide Andrea is one of the pioneers of building battery management systems, and I attended a talk once where he said, and I think this is a direct quote of what he said, using current electronics and current knowledge, it takes about 2 years and $250,000 to build a custom battery management system. So this is not a trivial task. It's not something you can do in your basement in a weekend, but it's actually very doable, especially for a medium to large size company who wanted to put together a battery management system. Completely doable. The research topic that I think deserves the most attention, and it's one that we are really trying to put a lot of energy towards understanding, a lot of effort towards understanding, is how do you calculate maximum power estimates for battery systems, because I don't think it's done properly right now. I don't think voltage limits are the thing that should be the basis for calculating power. And I'm not the only one. There's a number of other researchers who are publishing in this area who are publishing some new methods of power calculation based on physics-based approaches, and I think that the biggest gains to be made in battery management are in how we calculate battery pack power. The present methods we saw last chapter were based on the concept, the belief, that voltage limits should never be violated. We should never go below Vmin, we should never go above Vmax. And we had the discussion back then, I won't repeat it, that Vmin and Vmax are pretty arbitrary, and they're chosen from kind of an empirical point of view of doing a lot of cell charging and discharging and seeing what range of Vmin and Vmax appears to give good lifetime of the cells. But the real issue is life. It's a degradation. It's how do I keep the cell healthy for as long as possible while getting as much performance out of this cell in that lifetime. So the assumption in last chapter was if we violate voltage limits, then the cell will degrade quickly, but if I maintain the voltage limits, then the cell is going to have a long and productive and maybe even happy life. But in fact, we've already discussed voltage limits may be violated for short periods of time in some situations without causing any noticeably faster aging. And it also seems to be the case that normal cell voltages in some cases may cause fast degradation, particularly in an aged cell where we might not understand its dynamics quite as well. So the real issue behind power calculations really should not be cell voltage, but rather the rate of aging or degradation of the cells. The power limits should be calculated to directly optimize a trade-off between performance and the degradation that's experienced by the cell. This is a really challenging thing to figure out how to do, because if we want to make a trade-off, there's some concepts of optimization that we'd have to study to do the trade-off well, but we'd also need, more fundamentally, models, mathematical descriptions of how degradation happens. And those models are lacking right now. There's a few models of degradation mechanisms that exist, but they're certainly not very complete models available at this point. But there's a big incentive that some have suggested that if we can do this optimization of power control to extend life perfectly, we might be able to reduce battery pack sizes by up to 50% and yet still deliver the required performance. And that's an enormous incentive. If I'm able to save $1 or $2 for a battery pack, the automakers would spend quite a bit of money to do that because they sell a lot of battery packs. But if I can save 50%, hundreds of dollars on a battery pack, there's a huge incentive to learning if this can be done and how to do it. Modeling degradation is the key here. We've seen some topics back in the State of Health chapter that discuss qualitatively what is known about cell degradation, the types of mechanisms that exist. But it turns out that there's very little literature that talks about quantitative models of degradation. Can we make accurate mathematical descriptions of how degradation occurs that are accurate enough to be used in a control mechanism to extend life? And we saw that there were multiple mechanisms, and we've seen that there are interactions between some of the mechanisms, and it's not especially well understood exactly how all this works out at this point in time. And it kind of leads you in your more thoughtful moments to ask questions like, is this even possible? And I came across a definition of philosophy that I thought was amusing. This definition said, philosophy is a blind man searching in a dark room for a black cat that isn't there. So sometimes when you're doing research, you wonder, is there an answer? I'm putting a lot of effort into looking for an answer for models of degradation. And even if I can model degradation perfectly, am I going to be able to find a way to control it? The results we're seeing so far are simulation-based results, but they look promising. So I don't think we're on the same kind of futile search, but we don't know for sure. And that's the nature of research sometimes. Sometimes you go down a path that you think is going to be really productive, and it ends up being not so productive. And at the moment, we're waiting to see, and we're forging on with confidence and hope, but understanding that this is a risk that we are taking to see if this is going to work. One thing that is working in our favor is, even though there may be dozens or hundreds even of mechanisms that cause aging or degradation to happen in a battery cell, we don't need detailed models of all of them. Really what we need is some kind of a reasonably good model of the most important ones, the first order effects. The second order effects we'll worry about later, but if we can model the first order, the primary degradation effects, and if we can implement controls that have some influence over those, that's a very useful result, and that could impact the size of battery packs. And then over time, those models would be refined, and we can make better and better controls for them. Another thing working in our favor is there may be some mechanisms that are not influenced by anything that we have any control over. Maybe some of the mechanisms are based purely on calendar age, and controlling temperature or current or anything like that has no other impact. If we do find mechanisms like that, we don't have to model them because it's kind of a constant thing that we can't do anything about anyway. But if we model the most severe mechanisms that we do have some impact over by controlling cell current or temperature or something, then we have a hope for making a difference. In the literature, there's very few models, mathematical quantitative descriptions of degradation mechanisms. We are going to, in this chapter, look at two quite briefly. One is on how SEI layer, the solid electrolyte interface layer, forms and grows in the negative electrode, looking at a full order model and a reduced order model of that. And another one is on lithium plating. There are a couple of other models that have been proposed in the literature, but there's not too many. So these are two models that we can look at quite quickly to at least get an idea of what is out there and what they look like, and how we might make a reduced order model and how we might implement controls on them. It's kind of a preview of the research topics that we're doing in our research program right now.